Welcome to History of Languages with Constance Clemmons for grade levels 7 and 8. Our topic today is how English changes over time. We will explore Old English, Middle English, and early modern English. And the changes we identify will include vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation, and meaning. We will use sources from these three time periods, and we will use ManyCam, Word Wall, and images as tools. So after the teacher welcomes the class and checks that their cameras and microphones are working, they are given a few minutes to introduce themselves. We engage in a short warm-up exercise, and then we begin the class. I ask the students to read the passage without any context being given first. So, Jack, please read what you see here. I am thy father's spirit. And the whole passage is read. So, class, what do you think is going on here? Can you tell? What does it sound like? It does sound like a ghost. Yeah, and it sounds like he's in trouble. What? Uh, does anyone recognize what this might be? Sounds like Shakespeare? You're right. And it sounds like somebody knows? Yeah. This is from Hamlet, and the speaker is Hamlet's father. We want to ensure, of course, that the students understand the passage. So we break it down and paraphrase what we just read into modern English and talk a little bit about the plot, and we talk about the ghost. So, class, please underline words that you see in the passage that we don't use anymore or that we use rarely. And they identify words that we just have dropped out of usage. And we recognize that the words that are underlined, like purged, forbid, harrow, foul, are still pronounced the way they were in Shakespeare's time, still pronounced the same way today. This similarity in pronunciation and the similarity in grammar, these are two things that tell us that the reason why this passage is called modern English, which is always a huge surprise to the students because everyone calls it Old English. But in fact, it is classified by linguists as modern English. And now we're going to turn to another passage to understand what changes between the year 1500 and 1601. There was a big change. So, as we did with the Shakespeare passage, we're going to just plunge in without knowing the context, without knowing the story, because we want to just listen to the language. So, after I read, we'll talk about the narrative, and the students listen to my reading. One that apple with shortest sorter, the draught of merit has passed to the rotor, and bathed every vein in sweet liquor, of which virtue engendered is the flour. And I read the whole passage that you see here. All right, class, your job now is to guess what's going on in this passage. And to help you do that, I'd like you to underline any words that you recognize in this text. All right, good. I see you see a lot of words. And all right, Mary, what do you think this passage is about? Okay, I see. So we know it's about something to do with April, March, and liquor, maybe liquor and flower and courage. All right. Otherwise, we're not so sure. I introduced the students to the Canterbury Tales. Geoffrey Chaucer, the 15th century, and we talk about the Norman invasion and how that brought Norman French into English, and we identify these import words and talk about how every language, most languages, maybe all languages, have import words. Uh, now, then we paraphrase the poem line by line. So the students have an understanding of the action of the poem. And after that's done, we spend time on what's important to us for the purposes of this lesson is to recognize how language changes. And I point out the following. After I repronounce for them, bothered and tundra, slepen, pricketh, longen. I ask them to deliver up what the modern way is that we say these words. After they've done that, they recognize two things: that pronunciation has, dramatically changed, especially vowels, and that word endings have dropped off. We pause here for students to share what they know about the early Renaissance, and they share their knowledge and they make connections with the values that we've talked about that are exemplified in the Canterbury Tales. And then each student is given the chance to speak in Middle English, and they repeat after me, and I'll illustrate with this first line. One, but April with his shores sota. And you could see embedded in those words showers, shores, sweet, sot there. And then we've gotten ready to time travel to our next example of English. So the students understand that we're going back to the year 700 AD. I'll just illustrate a little bit of this passage, but I will read the whole passage to the students. All that bacon wath begotten with gulda, yimis stoden far at foldens yatum. So a passage from Old English is always very terrifying to students because we can't read it at all. But once we start looking carefully at the poem, we start to recognize words that we still use today. And in this passage, the students will underline those words, and they know the words me, too, on night, and rest. But there's an interesting phenomenon going on when we slow down, get over, our nervousness, and take a poem line by line. Each student has a turn to speak Old English, and they repeat after me. All that bacon was begotten mid colda. There. And suddenly the meaning just jumps right out, and they recognize that they're actually understanding Old English. All that beacon was begotten with gold. So the writer is talking about, a shiny object. And once we grasp that little bit of meaning, I help the students paraphrase the entire poem. So they understand the poem, we've rendered it into modern English, and this turns into, a fabulous platform to talk about Vikings, to talk about King Arthur, and they share anything they know from that period of time around the year 700 in England. Students will take turns reading the six true false statements. I've put in the answers here, but I leave it up to the students, of course, to say whether this is true or false. And next, we're going to play a game. The oldest form of English we studied today is called not Proto-English, not Pre-English, Old English. And Hamlet hears a voice that says, I am thy father's court jester. No. Spirit. And the historical event that brought a major new French influence into English was, of course, the Norman Conquest. And our last question is putting the order of English in the right sequence. And of course, Dream of the Rood, Chaucer, Shakespeare. So students had a break and they've come back from their break. I check with them again, as I did at the beginning, to make sure they can see the screen. And they're looking now at a word bank of Shakespearean Elizabethan common words, because we're going to do a 5-minute writing exercise where they write like Shakespeare. And I get a volunteer. Nick is going to volunteer to read the words. And after he's done that, I ask Marie if she'd like to read the example of a poem that is written using some of these words, and she reads the missing homework. And students are given 5 minutes to write their own poem using words from the word bank. Those poems were really amazing. The students read them all. And this was a class of 12 students. So I put them in breakout rooms next, and I give them the word bank again. And I give them 5 minutes to have a conversation in Shakespearean English. I bring them back from the breakout rooms, and they talk about what they talked about. So before we lead into our homework assignment, I asked the students to write in the chat box what they learned in the class, and what they'd like to remember, what they liked best. And most of them write about the ghost, which is fine. And most of them remember something like pronunciation has changed, spelling has changed, and word endings have dropped off, and some words have disappeared all together. So I'm going to end this presentation by showing you the homework assignment that the students will do, and it's to write a passage for 400 years into the future using new words, and then to explain what these new words mean. So this is an exercise that will reinforce our main idea in this presentation, which is that language changes. Thank you for this opportunity to share what I love about the history of languages.